Welcome to the Book Faire podcast. My name is Anthony, and this week we have an interview with Gordon Korman. Two major court cases regarding AI have been settled in favor of major tech companies over authors. A recent report looks at declining readership and links it to recent trends. And Brooklyn Library offers a teen advocacy toolkit to give young people tools and resources for fighting against censorship. Now let's begin with an interview with Gordon Korman, author of over 100 middle grade novels, including his newest release, Snoop. Gordon, how are you doing today?
Oh, doing great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. Would you like to start off by introducing yourself to the audience and the book we'll be discussing?
Sure. Yeah. My name is Gordon Korman. I am a author of over 100 books for middle grade and teen audiences. And my latest book is called Snoop.
And what is Snoop about?
So Snoop is about a kid named Carter. He's 12, and he gets into a spring break skiing accident, kind of a head-on collision, more or less, with his little brother. And as a result of it, as a freak accident, he manages to break both his legs at the same time in exactly the same spot. So here's this kid. He is completely stuck at home. He is doing everything virtually. School. He is isolated, lonely, definitely bored. And I guess he gets wind of the girl he's had a crush on since kindergarten, possibly cozying up to his arch enemy in the grade. But he has no way to confirm it. He's stuck at home. So he realizes that there is a security surveillance camera in the park right next to the school that they would have to walk by every day. And it's open to the public. Anyone can get on it. So he starts accessing that camera to sort of snoop on these two people. And he kind of gets hooked. Sort of discovers quickly that once you start looking, it's really hard to start looking away. And, it's almost like, if you're familiar with the old Hitchcock movie Rear Window, it is kids' Rear Window with 2025 technology.
And with that inspiration of the old Alfred Hitchcock murder mystery, how did that idea kind of develop? Because while there are a lot of young adult and teen novels that do delve with serious topics, kind of feels like middle grade, including murder mysteries in a middle grade story, doesn't seem as age appropriate. So how did that story develop in Snoop?
Well, I mean, there's no murder there's some serious stuff going on in Snoop, but there's no murder. I mean, I think that I've always sort of looked at, kind of old movies as a great sort of creative field to till, to sort of see if I could take an adult story and kind of glean maybe the basic bare bones of it and kind of reinvent it as a story that kids could relate to. I had a book a number of years ago called Swindle that was kind of a similar thing. It was kind of the kid reinvention of almost like an Ocean's 11, like a classic old school kind of heist movie. So I felt like it could work for Carter and Snoop, just because I feel like the technology available to someone in 2025 versus just looking out the rear window of your apartment is so different, right? We have cameras, we have internet, we have drones. And so we could sort of fool around a little bit with these pretty serious issues of privacy and access. One of the crazy things is we have access to such incredible amounts of information because of our technology, but we've not really given a lot of guardrails or guidance as to what we should do with this. And if you think it's hard for an adult to grapple with this, think of how it is for any kid. Carter is not the most, controlled, sort of well-behaved 12-year-old in history. But even he reaches a point where he almost looks at what he's doing and has this moment of, the old saying, if you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. That's where Carter sort of has to get to.
And while Carter is at home using these publicly available security cameras, looking around town, spying on his classmates, he is doing so on a public forum. However, he eventually does go into logging on to private security cameras. Is that an issue of privacy that Carter grapples with in the story?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think one of the things that I felt like the challenge of it was just to make it believable, right? Carter is sort of sucked into this very, very gradually. First, he is just checking out his his crush and her classmate, but then he starts to see other things, realize there are other cameras, and when those won't get him what he wants, he's like, well, if I can get into the ice cream shop, then I could see this. And then he starts to see some strange things around town that he can't explain. Animal sightings of animals that have no business whatsoever being in his sleepy suburban town. And he's like, what's this? And when he researches that, he realizes these are all endangered species, and begins this sort of process of putting together evidence of an endangered species trafficking ring in his little town, right? So I think that the trick from a craft standpoint of writing the book was just to make it believable that this kid would not jump in with both feet and suddenly become this total spy and snoop, but that he could get gradually sucked in bit by bit.
And one of the interesting things about this is that Carter is a kind of screen addicted social media junkie. He broke his legs on vacation because he was distracted with his phone. However, Carter throughout the book and in his virtual learning, when he's back in school, but his with his broken legs and doing so from home, he talks about how he's actually a good student. When you are writing this character, coming from the angle of someone who is obsessed with social media and cell phone usage, was it easy to kind of go into the negative stereotypes and tropes of those kinds of characters? Did you kind of just naturally subvert those, or was that a conscious decision?
I mean, it was a conscious decision. Carter is absolutely a, screen addicted couch potato with whether he's got two broken legs or not. He is absolutely not an ideal kid. He is not an angel. But I don't know. I was very much in Carter's head through the whole process of writing Snoop. And in spite of all the trouble he gets himself into, I think no one could disagree with the fact that he's a really good kid. He's the kind of kid you'd love to be your child, or he's the kind of kid you'd love to get to know. He doesn't have to be perfect, but he is a good kid at heart. And I think that knowing his personality and the kind of person that he was, I think was what kept me from veering into any of those kinds of stereotypes of the screen obsessed kid.
You said that Carter's a good kid despite his imperfections. Writing characters, and with as many books as you've written, creating characters with these flaws, how important is that to making someone that is both relatable and believable to a young audience?
Well, relatable, believable, and fun. Let's face it. Like how many perfect people do any of us come into contact with in our lives? Quirky characters. I mean, if you go all the way back to my first book, what you'll find in common with Snoop is that the characters are quirky. The situations are antic. There are a lot of scrapes. There's a significant amount of humor in most of them. That's just sort of my writing style. And I mean, I have to say, like, the relationship between Carter and his brother. Uh, I'm an only child, so I am completely alien to the sibling relationship. And I loved writing this one. It's kind of an amalgam of every friend I ever had growing up and their siblings. And it always stunned me to how siblings could love each other and have this deep, deep connection, but absolutely torture each other every chance they get. You know, it's an experience that I've never actually had personally, but I feel like it really comes out with Carter and his brother and Snoop.
With Carter's story, a lot of social media for young audiences will sometimes vilify social media in almost a cartoony way. Without going into the ending too much, do you feel that as an author, you fairly represented a balance of using technology while also understanding the importance of setting healthy limits on screen time?
Absolutely, and you know, I mean, I think some of that comes from just being a parent. I've raised 3 kids. They probably all spent way too much time looking at screens. Um, as a parent, I never wanted to be the police, right? Like you want to set limits on your kids, and you want to set the right limits on your kids. But you know that if you're too much of kind of the social media police, the technology police, the screen police, eventually they're just going to tune you out. And I kind of feel like I let that be sort of my north star for what position that the actual narration of Snoop would take. I mean, you kind of get the feeling that Carter is still, at the end of it, not that different than he was when he began. He's still going to love that stuff. He's still going to be the kind of kid that he started out, but he's had this experience, and he just sort of he sort of learned his lesson until the next time, right? It's certainly not going to be the last mistake this kid ever makes.
And you mentioned that Carter learned his lesson, and a lot of times with books for young audiences, there seems to be a almost a mission or like a rule that there has to be a moral. Do you find that writing these stories that include quirky characters where humor is such a big aspect of them, do you feel that they are fairly learning their lessons while also keeping those that kind of lighthearted attitude in them throughout the story?
I don't. I mean, I love. I mean, I would hate to think that I was ever such a grown up that I could write a book without at least a hint of subversiveness in the characters and how they view the world and how they view authority figures and the adults in their lives. But yeah, Carter sort of learns his lesson. But I never would have sat down and written this book like, oh, I want to write a book to show kids that privacy is important, or I want to write a book to show kids that they spend too much time staring at screens. First of all, the kids who spend too much time staring at screens, they know it, right? It's not like it's a total mystery to them. I think what Carter really learns is just a sense of perspective, but at the same time, he's pretty heroic by the end of it, not wanting to throw out any spoilers there, but I think that he becomes a hero by kind of breaking the rules even further. There's a moment where he sort of mostly learned his lesson, and he has to sort of go with that or do what he knows is the right thing to do, and he makes that difficult choice. Gets himself into way more trouble, but it ends up being the right thing as well.
You said that Carter becomes a hero by breaking the rules. You mentioned that you like to write subversions and how the characters view authority, and that's something that really resonates with young readers, giving readers these characters with a sense of agency in their lives and a sense of control, and kind of stepping away from Snoop and more as a whole. With a lot of your work dealing with characters that have this kind of same view of authority, do you see rather that this message is received well by the audiences?
I mean, I just write them, and I sort of feel like how kids respond to them are sort of out of my control, and I am so gratified and floored and overwhelmed that the response of readers to my books has been what it is. I mean, I'm absolutely beyond grateful to have managed to put together the kind of audience that I have over the years, right? But the other thing too is that when you write about kids who are experimenting with defying authority here and there, within reason, obviously. Um, I actually think that authority is actually comfortable with those kids too. Like, if you deserve the authority, you should probably have a certain respect for kids who will test you again appropriately and here and there.
I definitely agree with that. That there needs to be a sense of respect, and that's something that I see a lot in some of the other work I've read from you. And talking about how it's been received well, and you're very overwhelmed by that. Again, having written over 100 books, that's there's a lot of authors that barely get one or two out in their lifetime. What is your work schedule? What does your work schedule look like? How many stories are you developing, and how many books get released each year?
Well, I have two different publishers, right? Scholastic, who publishes Snoop, and HarperCollins. So I've been in a pretty regular schedule. Like, I usually do a Scholastic book in the summer and a Harper book in January. So it's two books a year, which is a tough but not insane schedule to keep up. I mean, the reason why I've written so many books is I got this really incredibly early start. My first book was my seventh grade English project that was published when I was a freshman in high school. So I was 14 when my first book came out, and I kind of never stopped. Right. So, I speak to kids all the time, do a lot of school appearances and bookstore kind of gigs and stuff like that. I'll say, well, Snoop is my 106th book. And they'll be like, brah, you must be the fastest writer of all time. And my answer is not really. Like, not that I'm slow, I'm not. But the reason why I'm able to do this up to those kinds of numbers is just that I got this incredibly early, lucky head start when I was in middle school, and I just kind of never stopped.
And it's really great to hear you kind of acknowledge that it was a lucky head start, because
Oh, absolutely.
there are so many aspiring authors out there. And kind of getting into the business side of things, with working with two publishers, what is what is it like working with them? Is there an expectation, a contract? Do you have to submit manuscripts with the pitch to publish them, or do they come to you with an expectation that a book will be released in summer of 2027?
I mean, I'm not under contract to anybody required to, oh, you need a book every year or whatever. It's just sort of an expectation. Uh, I'm sure a lot of authors that you've interviewed talk about their relationship with editors being the most important thing. So the two editors that I work with, I've been working with for 20 plus years, in both cases, and it's obviously they're my editors and there's some business to it, but they're my collaborators too, and I pitch ideas to them. They pitch ideas to me. I really could not keep up this pace without them. And because the two publications are always 6 months apart, it's been really, really cooperative between my two different publishers. They have not stepped on each other's toes. There have not been any, like, oh, all the good stuff goes to the other guys. It's been fantastic. I'm incredibly grateful for that.
And you said that you have a cooperation with the publishers, and you've worked with the same editors for 20 years, which is crazy to hear, because I've talked with plenty of authors, and they mention editors here and there. And I've also spoken with people who wrote for TV, and the editorial process with TV is a lot less favorable towards editors, because they'll talk about notes from producers who kind of aspire to be writers, whereas working with editors in publishing, it's people who are really familiar with the industry, and when they give notes, it's typically something that's very constructive and benefits the project as opposed to feeling like it's a combative note coming from a producer in TV.
Yeah, I think you need to get similar to getting started. You need to get lucky. You need to get your foot in the door. I mean, I just was very very lucky to hook up around the same time with these two editors, and we just see eye to eye. That's not to say we don't disagree, and they suggest changes that maybe I don't want to make, and we're not 1,000% on the same page about everything creatively, but in the end, it's all about we want the best book we can, right? We want to end up with the best finished product for kids to read, and so a lot of writers will. I mean, editors move a lot, and there are a lot of reasons why you might sort of have a lot of interruptions in your author editor relationship. But for me to have two of them running consecutively for over 20 years has been amazing.
You also mentioned earlier that you'll sometimes look at inspiration in older stories or movies, things that are targeting adult audiences, and how you can subvert those into stories for young audiences. In writing so many books, is there room in your stories and in your writing process to put more of yourself in those stories still? Are you finding it a difficulty in not retreading inspiration from your own personal experiences?
It's kind of funny you mentioned that because I mean, 106 books in, as I ponder like what's going to be next. I mean, there are obviously more than one occasion where I'm like, oh yeah, that's a great idea, but I sort of did that in this other book, way back when. Um, but I guess the real point is how that's more the exception than the rule. I find it kind of stunning that after so many books, I still just feel like there's so many ideas out there that I haven't written about. It's strange and wonderful, and I don't want to think about it too much for fear that it's going to stop. But is not being nearly the problem for me that I think maybe it even should have been. In terms of finding myself in books, it's funny. I've written about my kids. I've written about friends. I've written about people I know. Um, the one person I've really never based a character on in a large way is myself. My wife is convinced that's because I see others much more clearly than I see myself. She's probably right. I don't argue with my wife, so I'll go with that.
And with so many books that you've written, when you did hit that 100, was there a moment of reflection? Was it like a big celebration in your life? Was there even time to kind of reflect on it, or were you already working on the next thing?
Well, I knew what the next book was going to be when I finished my 100th book. My 100th book was called The Fort, and I sort of still feel it was a really good book 100 for me because it was basically about kids and friendships. It may have been a little bit more serious than most of the ground I normally plow, but there was definitely time to sort of celebrate that milestone. And I do a lot of school appearances, and kids, they always ask, how many books have you written? As soon as my number got up to like 85 or 90, the next question was always like, oh, what are you going to do for book 100? And you could tell they were like, going to throw a party, is someone going to shoot off fireworks, is there going to be this mega celebration? But it really did underscore from them before me that there was something important about hitting 100. And you know what? As usual, they were right and I was wrong. Because if I could somehow go back in time to that seventh grade English class and kind of whisper in the ear of 12-year-old me who's working on book one that one of these days we're going to have 100 or 106, I mean, that would have been mind blowing.
I do got to say that I did read The Fort. I loved that one.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
It's when I talk to people about what I do on this podcast, they say like Judy B. Jones. Like, no, let me tell you about this story called The Fort.
Oh, nice. Nice. Thank
Wow.
you.
And to like, just to say, like, yes, the fact that middle grade books can touch on such serious topics, it's why I do what I do. It's why I love talking about these stories, because they do serve such an important role in society, in creating the next generation of adults, and that's why I love it. Um,
Yeah, no, I agree. And, one of the things I have never felt remotely restricted in terms of what I could write about or how I could express myself creatively as a middle grade writer. I mean, I can write about the most serious topics. I can write life and death adventure. Things can get pretty dark. I can write the lightest, most physical stand-up comedy that would not have been out of place on the Benny Hill show. I can really do it all in this genre.
and the last question, I like to ask this to all guests for the show, just to give you the final word to say whatever you would like on this topic, be as in depth or as brief as you'd like. Gordon, how do you see yourself and the work that you do as an author?
How do I see it? I mean, I think um, I try not to take myself too seriously, and I don't feel like I'm educating the world. I don't feel like any of my books are going to communicate the meaning of life to anybody. But I think there's something incredibly important about middle grade specifically, right? I think that it's sort of an age where you kind of become in charge of your own opinion, right? Not that you weren't with the picture books you loved, but that was kind of wrapped up in, my mom did these great voices or my dad dressed up, but when you get up there into the middle grade years, like you choose what you like and what you don't. Right? And it's very, very personal. And I think that readers carry those decisions that they make at those years for their entire lives. And my first book came out in 1978, so it's nothing for me to meet somebody 50 who's like, "Oh man, I read that book when I was in fifth grade." Um, which makes me feel ancient, but also makes me feel like, wow, it really these these middle grade years and the books we read and the cultural things we decide to love, that's very much part of the formation of the kind of people that we'll be, and that's not chopped liver, as they say.
Thank you. That was an interview with Gordon Korman. Gordon is one of the largest names in middle grade fiction today, with Snoop being his 106th published novel. Snoop is out now, and you can find more about Gordon and all of his work at gordonkorman.com. Next, we'll be looking at notable releases out this week, but first, if you appreciate the work being done with the Book Faire podcast, there are a few ways to show your support. First, you can like, comment, favorite, subscribe, or follow the podcast wherever you are currently listening to help push it out to new listeners. Second, you can follow the podcast on Blue Sky at BookFairPod. You can also go to patreon.com/thebookfair to find episodes posted early, as well as links to news sources used in the show. Lastly, the best way to support the Book Faire podcast is simply to share it with a friend, an educator, or a young reader in your life. Now, on with the show. Next, let's take a look at some recent releases, beginning with Blood in the Water by Tiffany D. Jackson. 12-year-old Kehlani would rather spend the summer in Brooklyn, honing her detective skills by working to prove her incarcerated father's innocence, than visit family friends, the Watsons, at their Martha's Vineyard home. Despite her protests, though, she finds herself traveling to Massachusetts, where she butts heads with her hosts' snobby granddaughters, Cassie and London. When local teenager Chadwick is found dead near the infamous Jaws Bridge, police initially conclude he'd been eaten by a shark. But further investigation suggests that Chadwick's death was a homicide, prompting Kehlani to begin her own inquiry. After all, it's the perfect opportunity to sharpen her sleuthing know-how. Suspecting Cassie, who is the last person to see Chadwick alive, Kehlani teams up with the victim's younger brother, Miles, to figure out what happened. As she gathers intel, she also uncovers conflict within the community and learns that not everything on Martha's Vineyard is as glamorous as it appears. In her exhilarating middle-grade debut, Jackson examines class inequity by centering incarcerated parent-child dynamics alongside an affluent black community from which Kehlani often feels excluded. The protagonist's whip-smart first-person narration expertly complements the suspenseful murder mystery plot, while chilling prose, atmospheric storytelling, and rich explorations of the island's black history culminate in an accessible and satisfying thriller. This book is recommended for ages 9 to 12. Next up, The Case of the Contraband Closet, Bubblegum Shoes Number 1 by Goldy Moldavsky. Moldavsky makes her middle grade debut in this sharp series starter about an amateur detective who reveres adult investigators from classic noir movies. New Jersey 7th grader Maya's snooping lives in infamy, especially since an incident severed her friendship with BFF Jordan. In detention yet again, Maya uncovers a link between her fellow inmates Jordan, Clementine, and Ava. All three tweens have had something confiscated and tossed in the contraband closet, where students claim decades' worth of forbidden items languish. Lucky for them, Maya knows how to break into it. But when the girls find the closet empty, and school principal Mr. Spade witnesses their B&D, the administrator presents an ultimatum. Maya and company must find the true perpetrator behind the missing objects within a month, or Maya faces suspension. Maya's maturation, rediscovery of the joys of friendship, and developing crush on spray painter Frito are heartfelt and groundbreaking. Witty noir references add theatrical gravitas to the tenuous Allies' ensuing investigation, which includes a hilarious retooling of traditional detective film settings, as when the group piles their school's underground legends gambling ring for information. The cast is racially diverse, and this book is recommended for ages 8 to 12. Next on the list, Free Piano, Not Haunted, by Whitney Gardner. A fast-talking ghost mentor, an endearing tween, and a possibly cursed musical instrument combine in this emphatically rock and roll graphic novel that riffs on themes of identity, legacy, and learning to own one's sound. When Margot discovers a busted keyboard marked Free Piano, Not Haunted, she hauls it home, only to discover that it is indeed haunted by a ghost named Vision, a 1980s pop star. Despite Vision being an uninvited guest in her home, Margot forges an unlikely friendship with the spirit, who helps Margot navigate feelings of abandonment from her fame-chasing father, low-key resentment towards her overworked mother, and her own growing desire for creative validation. Psychedelic visuals bursting with retro vibes and poppy hues by Gardner juxtapose Vision's pop music aesthetic with the subdued, screen-lit radiance of present-day adolescence. Dynamic paneling engages readers, and supporting characters, such as a crystal-loving adult, add warmth and charm to a ghost story that somewhat heavily ruminates on feelings of alienation, artistic ambition, parental disconnection, and the seductive pull of fame. This book is recommended for ages 10 and up. And lastly, The Yomagiri Tunnel by Kelly Morashige. 18-year-old Monica feels adrift. Her best friend is moving to New York City for college, and only Monica seems shaken by classmate Shun's recent death. During the Japanese club's farewell get-together, Monica learns about the legend of the Yomagiri Tunnel, and its ability to resurrect the dead. She sets out to enter the tunnel, and when she arrives, Monica meets Shiori, a surly teen from another school intending to revive her own mother. The duo ventures into the underpass as reluctant companions. But when they're separated in the dark, Monica plummets into a memory of the first time she saw Shun, setting into motion a series of events in which both girls encounter past recollections and new confrontations in ethereal visions conjured by the tunnel that challenge their self-perceptions and reveal uncomfortable truths. With empathy and insight, author Murashige presents nuanced discussions around emotional abuse and substance reliance, and depicts the characters' experiences navigating loss and grief as they search for the space to grow and heal. Chapters open with a spoof on high school yearbook superlatives, most addicted to slushies, best stalker, etc., highlighting Monica's offbeat humor and acerbic first-person narration. This book is recommended for ages 14 and up. Next up, let's take a look at a few headlines, beginning with court rulings regarding AI training on copyrighted materials without authors' permission. There had been a case filed by authors Andrea Bartz, Charles Gaber, and Kirk Wallace against Anthropic, a tech company that had been using full copies of their books, among others, in Books 3 dataset. The lawsuit alleged that the books were being pirated and used to train language models without the consent of authors. While the federal judge in California ruled in favor of the authors that the copyrighted material was illegally obtained, the use of the text within books in their entirety to train large language models, also known colloquially as AI, falls under fair use. This would mean that the tech company using legally obtained copies of books and training LLMs is considered transformative and not infringing on the author's copyright. Anthropic is not the only company facing legal challenges, as Meta, the company behind Facebook and Instagram, has also been wrapped in a lawsuit with authors since 2023. The judge in the case has moved to dismiss it, saying, quote, "The court has no choice but to grant summary judgment to Meta on the plaintiff's claims that the company violated copyright law by training its models with their books," end quote. However, despite the ruling in their favor, Judge Vince Chabria has concluded that the plaintiffs in the case did not present sufficient evidence that Meta's use of their books was harmful. While the judge has said that feeding copyrighted material without authors' permissions is against the law, similar to Anthropic's case, it appears that they may conclude that it also falls under fair use. Next up, a look at some recent trends in reading and how they may be impacting politics. Going back to an article from The Atlantic in 2024, freshman college students are struggling with reading and reading comprehension. Vox offers a lengthy editorial post, which I'll include on Patreon at patreon.com/thebookfair, where other resources are available if you'd like to read more. In this post, they cover the history of social communication before the internet. The shortened version is that reading correlates with stronger reading comprehension and critical thinking skills. It's not a secret that children and people as a whole are not reading as much as they used to. Along with the rise in division in politics, the loss of critical thinking is extra concerning. Social media offers something that reading doesn't give as efficiently. People are driven to more intense and immediate dopamine releases. One way this can be achieved is by listening to people with a similar view to your own. Confirmation bias will lead to more tribal and emotional thinking, and as people funnel themselves into separate spaces based on political ideology, they will become more isolated from differing opinions. Another major thing that I have said throughout this podcast and will continue to do so is that reading helps practice empathy. A story presenting a different view or background can give insight to and help readers connect with diverse communities. Again, this article is very in-depth and goes over scholars in social sciences and history of communication. I would recommend giving it a look if you're interested in reading a more in-depth discussion. And lastly, Brooklyn Public Library is now offering digital toolkits for people interested in helping young readers become freedom to read advocates. Adding to their bevy of free resources for the summer, the Brooklyn Public Library is offering digital resources through their Books Unbanned program to help teens and young adults fight against censorship. The Freedom to Read Teen Advocacy Toolkit, available for free on the Books Unbanned website, includes resources to develop young people's leadership, listening, and public speaking skills. The toolkit works as a guide for a group-led program where each unit covers different aspects of advocacy and community leadership. Units included are building community, defining the freedom to read, and understanding the role of libraries in society, book bans, advocacy, and teen rights, advocacy, change-making, and finding your leadership superpowers, and the fourth unit, putting all the pieces together. The program is designed to be group-led, allowing for teens to create their own advocacy groups and lead themselves in writing and discussion activities. The program aims to support teens in understanding and articulating their personal values, learn about civic engagement, discover and discuss student rights, and defending, exercising, and advocating for the freedom to read. This toolkit is available for free at booksunbanned.com/toolkit. If you're a student, a teacher, parent, or advocate for the freedom to read, I strongly suggest looking into the Freedom to Read Teen Advocacy Toolkit and learning how you can help build stronger and more politically aware communities. This will conclude another episode of the Book Faire podcast. If you appreciate the work being done here, please consider following the podcast on Blue Sky or checking out patreon.com/thebookfair to find links to news sources used throughout the show. Of course, the best way to show support is simply by sharing the Book Faire podcast with a friend, an educator, or a young reader in your life. Thank you so very much for listening, and as always, I'll talk at you next time.